Our oldest European generation is disappearing more and more. With poor education, high value in their time, and living through the beginning of the industrial age, they could live through an age of more and more prosperity. Born in times of war, they need to save for the future. Unfortunately, in 1971 the gold standard on their money disappeared and an enormous inflation started, making their hard work for a big saving account losing its value. But it is not easy to change your way and thinking about to be able to leave something for their kids and continue good life. They became big savers, living a scarce life that they called prudent. But their kids that also are pensioners now learned that when their parents died and they inherit their big banking account, and at times their old home, they soon figured out that the value of this wasn't enough to save the world, and after taxes it was just enough for some renewals in their house and a lovely holiday. So these groups are spending more on themselves and enjoying their life after over 30 years of, at times, hard working. Even though nowadays a lot of them hasn't got high enough pensions to be able to enjoy the modern inflated prices. The younger generation has to live through a more difficult situation and stay with their parents until they find it worth to spend their long day at work only for a place to live. With an insecure future and high prices make them spend less on a home and more on joy, as well for the possibility to be able to create a group of friends, which is important for a social creature that the human beings are. But the lucky ones that are born in rich families get more opportunities to get more spoiled. And these leads to not being so careful and at times lose a big part of their inheritance. But this documentary will show you how mad the oldest generation can become with their hunger for possessions.
Kaiser. This is the Kaiser Report, and this is central bank monetary policy. Yeah, get it! Take some! Yeah! Stacey?
More money, they might call it. It is so much money, M-O-A-R, money, more money. And do you know what, Max? Now, some people say all that money printing is going to cause inflation and it devalues everybody else's currency, but they're offering us a bargain here. U.S. Treasury expects to borrow $2.999 trillion in net marketable debt in April to June quarter, $3.055 trillion more than estimated in February.
More in 6 months. Order now. Get $6 trillion more in 6 months. Come on down to the Fed bargain basement. Hi, I'm Jay Powell. I print money like a maniac. Come on down to the Fed's bargain basement. We'll give you $1 trillion right now. You got some old baseball cards. You got some old silverware. You got some old rags sitting around the house. We'll give you $1 billion. Come on down to the Fed's money printing shop right now.
You know, you might want to, this is Christine Lagarde's money printing. Go brrr.
Oh, Christine Lagarde?
Yes.
Hello. Je suis Christine Lagarde. And voilà mon machine de imprimer de argent. Regarde bien.
Unprecedented, the U.S. expects to borrow a massive U.S. dollar, $3 trillion or 14% of nominal GDP during the second quarter alone. Current outstanding public debt is now $25 trillion. I think we're about halfway there in this room.
Kaiser report never fails to deliver the goods. You know, we've been saying now for a few years that ultimately they're going to $100 trillion. Japan's already at 100% debt to GDP on their Fed's balance sheet. Kuroda, their central banker, has already taken their central bank above 100% of GDP in terms of debt. That's buying a lot of junk, a lot of assets. So America at $6, $7, $8, $9 trillion. They've got another $60 trillion to go. The globe is set to go to 100% GDP debt to on the balance sheets of the central banks. So, you know, there's $100 trillion to go. There's stock markets are booming in particular sectors, it's particularly in the banking sector. Remember the PPP program from the feds? It all went to JP Morgan first. They took their cut, which was substantial, like 20% or more. And then whatever was left over, they doled out to the poor serfs and peasants in America. Here, voila. It's like, you know, papal indulgences. We'll give you $10 if you give us $50 in banking fees, says Jamie Dimon. I'm the Pope of bad money. I'm the Pope of fiat, Jamie Dimon. My God, what a crook.
Well, you know, they continue to print. Apparently, the U.S. deficit, the budget deficit, will hit $4 trillion this year. I remember the shock only just recently in the last few years here on Kaiser Report of when the U.S. budget deficit hit $1 trillion. And we were like, oh, my God, like this is the end. But apparently, it's going to go to $4 trillion. That's why they're borrowing $3 trillion. But they're saying all of this infinite fiat is going to cause infinity war because let's look at this. Central banks' pandemic battle could stretch into an infinity war. Big central banks are buying from an expanding menu of government bonds, corporate debt, and consumer loans to help businesses and households through the coronavirus pandemic, and no one knows whether it can stop.
Right. Well, again, I was dead right in that the central banks are taking the entire economy private, right? They print the money to buy all the income-producing assets, to buy all the stocks, all the bonds, all the property, all the leases, all the mortgages, everything, right? So they're taking the entire economy private. I've mentioned that first as a concept maybe 3 years ago here on Kaiser Report. Now you have news reports from mainstream media saying, oh my God, what if they never stop? What if they just keep buying everything with all their printed money? What would that mean? So there's two possible outcomes. Number one is neo-feudalism, where you have a return to the Middle Ages and all of the economy is owned by a few oligarchs, and everyone else are living on, you know, peasant, indentured servant click farms, like click on the ads on the social media to try to win a protein pill. The other outcome would be pure Sovietization of the economy, where the state owns everything and everyone is equally poor. That would be the other outcome. So, but either one of those two are where we're headed, and or a combination of both. So that would be the worst of both possible situations, a pure kakistocracy. But one thing that's not coming back is free market American capitalism.
Well, Plucky's coming back because he loves money printing. Remember last episode, we wrote him off. We said the days of fiat are over. This is their Hail Mary, all this money printing going on. He is, of course, British. That's why he's so spindly like this. But he's got to print some pounds here.
Plucky, go, Plucky, go!
That's for the Queen. That's for the Queen. Max, we are reporting from our headquarters in the coronavirus zone. And you know what? The national debt has passed $24 trillion in the past week. I remember back in those innocent balloon boy sort of days back in 2009 during the last crash when it was just 12 trillion, 6.6 million unemployed last week. That's on top of the, you know, millions others in the previous week's 5.5 plus 3.6 plus blah, blah, blah. So now we have 17 million unemployed. That's over 10% unemployment rate. And of course, during this chaotic time, during the announcement of the new unemployment numbers, we saw the Fed introduce some new sort of $2.3 trillion scheme whereby they're going to buy high yield bond ETFs, i.e. junk debt, i.e. well, the fracking debt, all that fracking debt that's blowing up.
That's right. We knew the fracking industry was going to go belly up and that it would require a government bailout. We said that was 100% guaranteed. And we were right. You know, that's the thing about mainstream media. Not only are they forced to be broadcasting out of their basement, not only is Channel 4 in the UK now bankrupt and forced to be on the street and speaker's corner blabbering about to whoever they might gather in these times of social distancing, but we've been right. We've been right for 10 years. Right about fracking, right about the Fed, right about money printing, right about the stock market, right about the gold market, right about the silver market. And we were the only ones in the world to tell people to buy Bitcoin at $1. Back in 2011, we made hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin millionaires in 100 different countries. And that's why we're considered to be almost the Adam and Eve of Bitcoin. So let's talk about Jimmy Dore, Amy Goodman, Cenk Janker, and to some lesser extent, Joe Rogan, right? They look at these numbers and they look at what's happening in the economy, but they make no connection to the Federal Reserve Bank and money printing. Jimmy Dore's never mentioned the central bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, ever. And yet the progressives, if they want to be progressive and they want to progress the dialogue forward, they need to talk about the central bank. It is the key component of the global economy, the American economy, and the key crisis that we're experiencing today. So not to mention it is willfully ignorant.
Exactly. We have two different categories happening, the government and the Treasury, and then the Federal Reserve. And basically, neither of them have oversight. And they're pouring trillions of dollars to the corporate headquarters of huge corporations, not the small and medium-sized enterprises that are being funneled onto these crazy sort of online systems that don't work, but the major corporations, the multinationals, those that are getting bailed out, and the big banks. And the ordinary worker that, by the way, the left-wing party is supposed to speak on behalf of, they're stuck on trying to file unemployment benefits, and those unemployment benefits are built on COBOL, which is a software program written back in the 1950s, and there's only like a handful of people in the United States that are still programmers in COBOL. So the systems are going down across America, and people can't apply for unemployment online. They have to go in person, stand amongst thousands of other people trying to file online.
Right. So as the unemployment rate is now projected to reach 30% in America, higher than the Great Depression, the stock market's up 30% from recent lows, and the size of the central bank balance sheet has expanded by trillions. So the question is, which came first, the expansion of the central bank balance sheet or unemployment? What is the cause? What is the effect? As we've been saying on this show for 10 years, central bank balance sheet expansion causes the unemployment because it causes the deflation that causes the economic duress that creates the unemployment. The central bank will say, point blank, we're trying to fight deflation by printing money. And yet they cause the deflation by printing money. Oh, and the stock market happens to be up 30%. And the top 0.1% just made a few more $100 billion. It's an accident. That's what progressives don't understand. They don't understand that taxes and employment are not necessary. At 0% interest rates, and if you can print and borrow hundreds of trillions of dollars at a clip, you don't need workers. You don't need taxes. Americans paid $3.5 trillion in taxes last year. The Fed printed $6.5 trillion in 10 seconds last week, right? You don't need workers. You don't need employment. You know, if employment rate went to 100% unemployment, the stock market would be at 40, 50,000 on the Dow.
Of course, because anytime the progressives do fight, and they fought tooth and nail to get a $400 billion package in for the ordinary person in America, apparently that's not going to, a lot of that money won't even arrive for months from now. But immediately the Fed can create money and credit for all of these bankers. But every time they succeed in getting $400 billion for the ordinary Joe Bag of Donuts, then the bankers go, well, we can't disrupt, we need to get at least 10 times that back. We need triple, quadruple, quintuple, tentuple that.
Well, it's designed to disenfranchise every American who's not a friend of the central banks until we have a peasant class like you have in Saudi Arabia and a prince class like they have in Saudi Arabia. Jamie Dimon is a prince, and the central bankers and the bankers on Wall Street are the prince class in this neo-feudal period, and everyone else is part of the peasantry. What you used to call the middle class are becoming peasants. They're living out of their trailers. They're eating dog food. They can't scrape enough to get by. They're like Haitians trying to pick worms out of dirt And that's the way it's designed.
We also designed the situation in Haiti, of course.
Right, whether it's disenfranchisement in Haiti or bombing in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan or the attack on South American countries and the coups, that's all off-Broadway production of what became a Broadway production here in America. You know, people cheered the bombing of Iraq. Again, mainstream media, MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, CNN, yeah, let's bomb Iraq. Not realizing this is a off-Broadway production of what's coming to America within 2 or 3 years. Now we are experiencing the full frontal attack of our government attacking us.
That's me and Corona. That's me in the spotlight, abusing my position, trying to blame Chinese flu.
China wants to lead a new world order, and they're using the United Nations to grab power. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The United Nations. According to its website, the UN has one central mission: the maintenance of international peace and security. Well, I certainly like peace and security, don't you? And certainly it appears we've avoided another world war. And that's because the UN is supposed to be a place where all the countries around the world can work together for the benefit of everyone. But over the years, the Chinese Communist Party has been getting more and more influence over the UN. And that's already had serious consequences for the rest of the world. Joining me today is Anders Kor. He's the publisher of the Journal of Political Risk and principal at Core Analytics. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
So first of all, let's talk about the latest controversy. China now has an influential position in the United Nations Human Rights Council. How did the Chinese Communist Party get in the UN body meant to monitor freedom of speech, arbitrary detention, and enforce disappearances? Is it because they're so good at those things?
Well, no, they're one of the worst at those things. They're well known as one of the world's worst human rights violators, yet they've used their influence in the UN to get that position. They trade votes, they badger people, they bribe people. It's typical carrot and stick tactics to achieve those kinds of positions for these autocratic countries.
Well, so what kind of impact might China have on the UN Human Rights Council?
Well, they're going to have a bad impact. I mean, it's exactly counter to human rights. So, it's a big problem that they've joined. They're now already cutting down speech when if you have a human rights activist or a nonprofit organization come to speak at the Human Rights Council, they will typically try to shorten the amount of speaking time that they have. They'll try to keep people out, like they kept Dolkan Issa, who's a famous Uyghur activist and representative of the World Uyghur Congress. So they'll use every dirty trick in the book to keep human rights out of the Human Rights Council.
That's incredible. How can that be tolerated?
Well, a lot of countries, the UN is essentially run by the elites, the political elites of each country, the political leadership of each country, and political leaderships of each country are typically closely linked to the economic elites of each country. And those economic elites, of course, are making money often in China. And if they're not making money in China, then China can offer them to make money and use that leverage to influence the political elites, then to get votes to get China onto the council and other things. I mean, it's not just the council. There are many other organizations, UN organizations that China has joined. The Aviation Organization, the Industrial Development Organization, even they tried to get onto intellectual property, which was another crazy attempt and totally counterintuitive. But they can do it because they get the votes, because they have the money.
Countries are rethinking their economic reliance on China amid the global pandemic. Some are trying to lure businesses away from China. A Taiwan expert was one of the first officials from outside mainland China to visit Wuhan after the virus broke out. He sheds light on the issue of human-to-human transmission. From seating candidates at top jobs to leveraging debt relations, how Beijing infiltrated the United Nations in the past decades. The Department of Homeland Security is changing the visa rules for Chinese journalists. New rules aim to protect national security. And more investigations into TikTok, a Dutch privacy watchdog looking into whether or not the app protects children's data well enough.
Political alliances manifest themselves here, on the voting floor of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. In this room, countries impose legislation that carries weight worldwide, and so what happens in this room is the physical materialization of the world's politics. 47 years ago, exactly that happened when one of the General Assembly's most consequential votes occurred. China, you see, essentially has two governments. There's the Republic of China, which used to control the mainland and Taiwan, but today only administers Taiwan, and there's the People's Republic of China, which controls the mainland. Both claim to be the rightful governments of all of the Chinese territory, both Taiwan and the mainland, and so back in 1971, the United Nations had to decide which government would represent China. Essentially, the question was which government was the rightful leader of the territory, as there could only be one in the United Nations. The US was the main superpower opposing the People's Republic representing China, as it had a strong political and military alliance with the Republic of China government, and so the vote was essentially the US's sphere of influence versus the world. Among the 35 countries that voted against the People's Republic were much of Africa, the Central African Republic, Chad, Gabon, Liberia, Niger, South Africa, and plenty of others that sided with the US. Despite the US's effort, the resolution ended up passing, and the representative government for China in the UN was switched to the People's Republic of China. But what's interesting about this vote is not the result, it's who voted against the People's Republic. Since that 1971 vote, you see, something has changed. In 2007, the UN General Assembly met once again to vote on whether to adopt a resolution condemning the human rights situation in North Korea. As one of North Korea's strongest allies, this vote was China and its sphere of influence versus the world. In this vote, though, only Burundi, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Ghana, Kenya, Lesotho, Liberia, Madagascar, Malawi, Mauritania, and Tanzania voted against China. All the 43 other African countries either abstained or voted no along with China, because in the 40 years between these votes, political ties changed. Africa no longer bows to the US. Much of the continent is now economically and politically aligned with the world's fastest emerging superpower, China. The simple answer for why this is because China has pumped huge amounts of money into the continent of Africa. They're buying allies. For example, China built a $3.2 billion railway in Kenya trekking the 300 miles from Nairobi, the capital, to Mombasa, the second largest city and primary port, in 4 hours and 30 minutes. That's faster than what the fastest train in the US, the Acela Express, takes to travel the equivalent distance from Philadelphia to Boston. China also built a $526 million dam in Guinea, which helped push the country from having constant power shortages to making more energy than it needs and selling the extra capacity to its neighbors. China also built a $475 million light rail system in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the first of its kind in sub-Saharan Africa, designed as a way to combat the capital's crippling traffic. These are only a sampling. There are literally hundreds of others of Chinese infrastructure projects in Africa each year. All across the continent, China is playing a part in projects both big and small that are transforming African economies. It's important to note that these projects are not, though, free. Each of these three were financed by loans granted by China's state-owned and controlled Export-Import Bank, and these loans do, of course, need to be paid back by the countries granted them. Large African infrastructure projects, though, would be viewed as risky by any traditional bank and would therefore struggle to get financed, but China's Export-Import Bank doesn't care. Assuming cooperation between the Chinese and African countries' governments, this bank will give low-interest or no-interest loans to African countries so they can build these trains or dams or other projects. These loans are therefore considered a form of foreign aid since China doesn't expect to get all their money back, at least adjusted for inflation, since they're not charging much interest and there's a high risk of default. Of course, China isn't just financing these projects out of kindness. For each of them, there's a political goal behind it. You see, the country of China is running out of growth potential. Its era of double-digit year-over-year GDP growth is over as it makes the shift from industrializing to industrialized. Africa, meanwhile, is one of the least developed areas of the world, and a lack of development actually makes fast growth easy. The first step of economic development for many countries is natural resource exploitation. Nearly every country has some level of natural resources that can be used to kickstart growth, but first they need to have enough money to build the infrastructure and take the steps needed to gather these natural resources. As everyone knows, it takes money to make money, and China has money. By investing in African mining and farming, China can profit off Africa's growth and fuel the business back in China that requires minerals and food. But in addition to serving as a source of natural resources, Africa has another resource: labor. It might seem strange that China, the country that the world uses for low-cost manufacturing, is looking for a labor source elsewhere, but that is exactly what it's doing. China is a victim of its own success. The economic development that its manufacturing industry brought pushed a large segment of its population into the middle class, which raised labor costs countrywide. It's not bad news. China as a country has shifted from having a low-skilled to a medium-skilled workforce as their education level has improved, but for the lowest cost, lowest skilled manufacturing work, the country of China is no longer competitive. Therefore, Chinese manufacturing firms are setting up their own operations in Africa, one of the cheapest and lowest skilled labor markets in the world. Today, China is now the largest trading partner with Africa as a whole. Despite China being a vastly larger country than the US in population, the US and China both trade a similar value of goods worldwide each year. In this case though, whereas $48 billion worth of goods were exchanged between the US and Africa in 2016, China traded $128 billion worth of goods, nearly 3 times as much. Now, the whole idea of setting up a structure of power over other less developed states in order to gather resources and use their labor force might sound familiar, because that's largely what colonialism was. The motives behind European powers expanding their territory to less developed nations in the 15th through 20th centuries were remarkably similar to the motivations between China's growing economic influence in the developing world today. Despite what some may say, there is empirical evidence that China has been using these infrastructure investments to affect worldwide politics. It's been found that if an African country recognizes Taiwan as a country, they receive, on average, 2.7 fewer Chinese infrastructure projects within their borders each year. Conversely, if an African country votes overwhelmingly along with China in the United Nations General Assembly, they receive 1.8 more infrastructure projects each year. Considering that the General Assembly is an equal representative body where each country gets 1 vote no matter if they have 1 million residents or 1 billion, China is getting a lot of influence for, in the grand scheme of things, not a lot of money. China touts the fact that their foreign investment and aid is no strings attached. Unlike other institutions that give low or no interest loans to developing countries like the International Monetary Fund or World Bank, China gives loans with no requirements on factors like respect of human rights or democratic elections. Of course, this data linking infrastructure investment with political leanings shows that there are indeed hidden strings that require benefit for China rather than benefit for the receiving country. Western powers are understandably concerned about this shift in power dynamics towards a country with vastly different ideals. In 2017, China entered a select club as it opened a military base in Djibouti. While 4 other countries have bases in Djibouti, France, Italy, Japan, and the US, this base was unique as it was China's first base abroad, and those by themselves, military bases abroad, are unique. Only 15 of the world's most developed and militarily powerful countries worldwide have them, and now China is one of them. Although Western powers might be worried for the wrong reasons. The government of China is clearly putting a lot of focus and money into Africa, but not as much as you'd think based off the result they're getting: vast amounts of influence over a whole continent. There are 2 key numbers to look at. In 2015, China loaned just $12 billion to African countries. In the same year, the country invested a mere $3 billion into the continent. That's just not much, but the reason China is gaining this enormous influence over the continent is because the Chinese government no longer has to force this phenomenon. Private Chinese industry is taking hold of Africa. Of the estimated 10,000 Chinese businesses in Africa, 90% of them are privately owned rather than one of the numerous Chinese state-run companies. The Chinese companies in Africa are actually making money, some substantially so. The Chinese government certainly has provided a considerable push to the industrialization of Africa, but now that that's done, economic forces are pushing the initiative further forward. Chinese small business is gripping the continent. Much of the Western world is ignoring the prospects of the continent, ignoring that business in Africa can now be as profitable as business in China was when its period of tremendous growth began. Right now, Africa is establishing itself as the source of labor and resources for China, and so, until the West pays attention, Africa will continue inching forward on its path towards becoming China's China.
It's probably a safe bet that the all-powerful Chinese President Xi Jinping is not a regular viewer of 60 Minutes, but he'll certainly want to see this story. And that's because, from his point of view, it's all about the unthinkable. A Chinese spy, one of his own people, is betraying him, breaking ranks and defecting to the West. Australia, to be more specific. Tonight, China's dirty secrets will be revealed by a very brave man. Never before has a Chinese spy gone public in this way. In from the cold, our insider admits personal involvement in a series of Chinese espionage missions. In Hong Kong, violence and kidnappings aimed at disrupting the democracy movement. And in Taiwan, a master plan to bring down the president.
We sent some mainland students to join the Students' Association, and they pretended to support Hong Kong independence. They found out information about those pro-independence activists, then we attacked them verbally and made public all their personal data, as well as the data of their parents and family members. In such a way, it effectively silenced them. I influenced them with patriotism, guiding them to love the country, love the party and our leaders, and fight back strongly against those independence and democracy activists in Hong Kong.
In Hong Kong, we checked names, addresses, company details, and we've spoken to confidential sources. On the 22nd floor of this tower is the headquarters of Wang's spy operation. Business records link it to the Chinese military's weapons arm. The link hints at yet another of Wang's stunning revelations, that his organisation was allegedly involved in stealing US military intelligence. Coming up,
Being followed is really scary.
made in China,
We could instantly take down their Facebook.
the plan to overthrow a foreign leader,
Taiwan is in the front line. All democratic countries should pay attention.
and the plot to infiltrate Australia.
He was cultivated by Chinese government to run as a Liberal Party candidate.
That's next on 60 Minutes. Most spies will face a moment, however fleeting, when their loyalty falters. But rarely does it lead to an operative abandoning his country and spilling its secrets. That's what makes Wang William Liqiang's decision so unusual. That's you in the photo?
Yeah.
Is that your date of birth?
No.
That's not your name, is it?
No.
He says his moment of truth came 6 months ago with the arrival of a fake passport. It triggered a deep fear that he was about to lose his true identity forever. When did you decide to become a defector?
I was given the task to go to Taiwan. This time I was to change my name, my whole identity, to go to Taiwan and be a spy there. This is the main reason I came to Australia to seek asylum.
The mission Wang's bosses planned for him in Taiwan would have been his most critical yet.
U.S. Navy chiefs sailed their warships through the strategic and highly sensitive Taiwan Strait today.
Taiwan is the major fault line between the world's two most powerful countries, the US and China. Some experts say tensions over Taiwan could even spark war. But as Wang reveals, a secret battle is already being waged.
Among all issues, what the Chinese Communist Party is most concerned about is the unification of Taiwan. Then Xi Jinping's position would be unshakable.
Our insider says Beijing wants to topple Taiwan's current US-friendly president, and its master plan to do it will alarm the world. Is it right what you're saying? Your job was to meddle in Taiwan's upcoming presidential election secretly for the Chinese government?
Yes, that's why I needed to change my name and not use my true identity.
Was your ultimate aim to make sure the current president of Taiwan was not elected?
Yes. Taiwan was the most important work of ours. The infiltration into media, temples, and grassroots organizations.
Temples like this one were targeted by Wang's operation because they're such important political and social hubs here in Taiwan. His ultimate aim was to undermine the Taiwanese president because she's considered hostile by Beijing. The world woke up to the reality of election meddling when Russia was exposed for interfering in the 2016 US election.
They used sophisticated cyber techniques to hack into computers and networks used by the Clinton campaign.
It's eerily similar to what's now playing out in Taiwan. Deputy Foreign Minister Su Qianshu is convinced his country's political system is under cyber attack from Beijing. But his government has never been able to prove it. Are you concerned?
Severely, yes. Gravely, we are gravely concerned about this.
Why should the international community care about what is going on in Taiwan?
Taiwan is in the front line. So it's not only an issue between China, the Communist China and Taiwan. It's an issue between two political camps in the world. So what's happening in Taiwan today is a good example for what will happen in other parts of the world. And I think all democratic countries should pay attention to what's going on in Taiwan.
Democracy here is hard-won and fiercely protected. At this rally, political factions fight it out in a passionate, if at times overzealous, display of freedom of speech and political expression. Taiwan's democracy looks healthy, but Wang claims it's under attack, and he should know. One of his key missions was to back the presidential candidate appearing here tonight by secretly meddling in the election. This is presidential candidate Han Kuo-yu. He's preferred by Beijing and boasts an army of backers. But during last year's local elections, he had a secret army too. Wang knows this because he was their boss.
We established a cyber army. If we wanted to attack someone, we could instantly take down their Facebook. I was responsible for organizing the cyber army attacks, and a large number of people involved were university students.
And you were giving orders?
I gave the orders. We changed their IP addresses to other countries so they would not be identified. Once our messages were out, online public opinion would follow.
Wang reveals his organization also has control over operatives working at Taiwan's leading media outlets, who were directed to shift public debate in Beijing's favor.
Right now, we are facing multiple threats.
Do you think some within the Chinese Communist Party fear Taiwan's system of democracy?
Definitely, definitely. I mean, China has an authoritarian regime. Xi Jinping is his intent to disrupt our democracy, to undermine our government's credibility, and to decrease our citizens' trust in our government.
Would it surprise you to learn that the Chinese government is sending intelligence operatives into Taiwan with the order to interfere in the election?
If we understand how Chinese Communist Party runs their government, we won't be surprised by that.
Wang says he's supposed to be in Taiwan right now, carrying out his orders to sabotage the upcoming presidential election. Instead, since May, he's been hiding out in Australia, where his wife is studying and living with their 2-year-old son. It's taken 5 months for Wang to gather the courage to contact the Australian government and ask for protection.
Your story is one that is hard for anyone to believe. Your story is amazing. Your rise in China, your exit from China, and now the position that you're in the United States is one that people find hard to believe. I don't find it that hard to believe. I believe almost everything that you say, and I think telling your story to the people of the world and the people of America and China and everywhere else is very important for the world to understand what China's grand strategy is. Who is Miles Kwok? Why are you in the United States? All of these questions are going to be great questions for you to answer. And then I've got some other very specific questions about data and the Chinese Communist Party, and more importantly, the two currency worlds that you and I seem to believe exist. And be so important to China's success or failure going forward. So please share with me, why are you in the United States? What happened when you were in China, and why did you leave China?
I think it's very
If I stay in China, they will kill me. I love China, but I hate the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. I want to alert America.
Yes.
You are in great danger. The CCP believe that you are too naive. That's why I want to tell the truth about politics, army,
You say
culture,
that America
and
is too
economy.
naive to believe what... Basically, what's known is the Chinese Secret Service, the MSS, has come to London, has come to America to try to take you and take you back. What happened with the HNA chairman being, let's say, they would say he died or fell off a 2-foot wall this summer. Others, including yourself, would say that he was assassinated. Fan Bingbing was put into jail for supposedly tax treatment. We'll get to all of that, but let's go back to the CCP. What is the grand strategy, in your opinion? What is the grand strategy of the CCP in relation to in how it governs its relationship with the United States? What is the CCP after?
1 year ago.
1 year ago, September the 4th, I had a speech in Hudson Institute about China's black economy, and they stopped me.
You were going to speak at the Hudson Institute?
Yeah.
And they stopped it.
China has a plan to weaken the American economy, to make America unstable.
For those that haven't seen you before on video, 1 year ago, you predicted that the chairman of HNA would be killed within a year.
Yes, sir.
And 363 days later, he fell off a wall in Provence.
Yes.
And this is the concept of the government edifice of the Chinese Communist Party. In theory, they don't earn much money each year, right? In theory. But in practice, what you allege is there was this magical 28% shareholder of HNA that the New York Times wrote about that no one knew who owned HNA. It was an insurance company that started at zero in the last 8 years and rose to prominence.
Yes.
And there was a shareholder that no one knew who they were. Miles Kwok, you say that shareholder is Wang Kashan and his family.
Yes.
And originally, I think people thought that was crazy and that you were bombastic. And now, as things are happening, as you predicted, people are starting to believe more in you.
Yeah, correct.
And so what do you think the Chinese leadership is worth today? How wealthy do you think they are personally?
Very easy.
It's very
You
easy.
know that China's
You know,
GDP
China's
is
every
$10
GDP
billion.
more than $10 billion.
Right, it's about 12 and a half.
Why China print
Why does China print so much money?
Chinese operated the
China
country.
gives only 10% of GDP to the people in social support like housing and medical care.
How much? $1 trillion.
Yeah.
CCP takes the money and store them outside of China.
All the housing.
So you're saying it's the same thing as a government kleptocracy in Africa. In a bigger picture, there's this concept that a nation state like China, and China has said globally that their economic system is superior to that of Western capitalism.
Yes.
And when you peel back the onion, you see that there is no larger income and wealth dispersion than there is in China, because the elites are the kleptocrats and the people have very little.
Yes.
And those that actually rise through the ranks of this hybrid system end up going to jail or falling off a wall in Provence, right? But that's a very important distinction to draw when you look at the economy of the CCP versus the economy of Western capitalism.
Yeah.
Right?
100% correct.
So I'd love to ask you a couple of questions about that. You know, even Premier Li has stated that Chinese economic statistics are unreliable. What do you think the real economic statistics are as far as GDP growth? And I know you and I have had several conversations about the FX reserves. How do you think about the numbers that are reported for GDP growth versus what they really are, and the FX reserve number versus what it really is? I know
They create a bad bank. They cheat the world and make a false economy.
you came to this conclusion long ago, and you're right. I think you're right, of course, because you agree with me. So therefore, you're right.
money.
So this concept of two currency worlds is one that is lost on many people.
Yeah.
The RMB economy of China is internal.
Yeah.
And the economy of China in dollars is external.
Yeah.
And they're desperately in need of dollars because that's how they trade with the rest of the world. What was so compelling when I met you, the most compelling thing that you showed me was the chart of Chinese M2, the moving graphic.
Yes.
And we'll provide that moving graphic to the Real Vision audience separately in this video. But more importantly, Chinese M2 has grown from $1 trillion worth of RMB to, as you say, $30 trillion on an economy of 12.
Yes.
They've printed more money internally than any one country in the history of the world as a percentage of GDP. And as a percent, as call it M2 growth versus GDP growth, nothing has ever come that close.
Yeah.
So they've created a false economy of RMB and the exchange rate in dollars. So you took us to another place. You took us to Hong Kong for a minute.
Yeah.
Right? Why does Xi's little colony of Hong Kong still pegged to the dollar if China's economic model is so great? Why is that?
Very easy to answer.
Very easy to answer.
Hong Kong dollar is the accepted legal dollar. The Hong Kong banks launder the Chinese money.
Your allegation is that the Bank of China Hong Kong launders money for all of the Chinese leaders.
You can see in New York's Bank of China, all the windows are blocked.
All the windows are blocked?
They never open the windows even though over 2,000 people are working there.
The Bank of China in New York has 2,000 employees, and they are doing, you're saying they're doing everything from being spies to being mafia to being money laundering. Well, the economy was already slowing.
Very slowing.
Before we went into trying to put together a border adjustable tax or a tariff has just made it a little worse. The timing of the Trump administration's tariffs is not good for China.
Yes.
I don't know if it was intentional or not.
Very bad.
Right, but it's very bad. But when you go back to Hong Kong, Norman Chan and the HKMA, they've spent 78% of their reserves, excess reserves, fighting the peg. This peg's been in place for more than 30 years. And now, Hong Kong imports U.S. monetary policy, so they're having to raise rates while China's economy slows down, this could be a very big problem for Hong Kong, yeah? So you're saying that the trade war is going to cause Chinese economy to drop.
Yeah.
They want to challenge the supremacy of the U.S. dollar. So at the last Party Congress, basically there were far few chairmen of companies added to the Standing Committee and the Committee of the Politburo, right? Less corporate interest, whether they were heads of SOEs or heads of private, quasi-private companies, much less business people on the Standing Committee and the Politburo. Is Xi trying to send a signal? Is he trying to change the structure of the Standing Committee and the Politburo himself and take out business interests and make it more the thought of Xi? How do you think about what happened there at the Party Congress?
So June,
The CCP want all the billionaires to sign over their money to the party.
Basically, give us all your wealth. Just 2 days ago, it was reported in China that Jack Ma had to sign over ownership.
This is the June Lai.
In some of his ownership in VIE Alibaba to 5 unnamed individuals, which is a very strange thing to happen for one of the most powerful chairmen and CEOs in China, who is now immediately retired, and we don't know. Given the fact that the Chinese banking system is now, call it 400% of GDP, and you say that 45% of all loans in China might be bad. What we say in the US as a funny saying we have, a rolling loan gathers no loss. Right?
I like it.
So if you have 45% of your loans that are bad and your banks are 4 times your GDP, you're insolvent. Which major Chinese bank, in your mind, is at the highest risk of failure?
All of them.
All the SOE banks, all the joint stock banks?
Yeah. Number one is the
Number 1 is Bank of China. Number 2, Yixing Bank.
So you're saying that many of these banks work with the leadership in enriching them. So during the failures in the past of Hainan Development Bank, Guangdong International Trust, and Investment Corporation, GIDIC, and the P2P platforms that are failing today, right? We've had 200 P2P platforms fail in the last couple of months. Do you think the government will make investors whole, or do you think the government will allow losses to happen in China?
They
cheat the people.
So investors in China are the ones that lose their money,
and
the leadership gives a solution where they take what's left,
Yes.
and the institutions fail.
Yes, this is sure. Yeah.
If that happens, how does the leadership control the population from revolting? How does a revolution not happen?
Cyber control.
They have cyber control to stop the revolution.
Cyber control. And the way that they've been able, so what's fascinating about this big financial experiment that the Communist Party is engaged in, they control the narrative, right? They control the press, they control the people, they control the price level, right, of various things in China. They control food prices, they control energy prices, and in the end, they also, that's how they control the economy and control the people from revolting. And what you're saying is, if the economic gravity hits China, which it looks like it's hitting now, given the fact that they're now running a current account deficit and things are slowing down very quickly, that you think that they won't be able to control all of these things. Is that
The
correct?
Ling family had hundreds of billions. Then came P2P, and they cheated the people and took all their money. Everything is for the party. Everything belongs to the party. You must love the party more than your father and mother.
This is a perfect segue into why do the economists in the West, why do the economists in the West believe everything the Chinese Communist Party tells them? Why is this notion of globalism so prevalent amongst the economists in the U.S. and in the Western world? Why do they believe the Chinese Communist Party? Why can't we see what's really happening? Now, I feel like if you read in the press in the last 6 months, it looks like people are figuring out what the grand strategy of the CCP is. It's changed a lot in the last year. But why do the economists believe what the government says?
Very easy.
Too kind.
You are too kind.
They see you too naive.
They think you
It's
are too
bad.
naive to understand.
Long term, America's 50 years too good life. You never think have the bad regime there. You too kind. Second reason, you all the American.
So if we go back in time,
finance person
the
too
last
greedy.
20 years, the
They are
Americans
having
had a
BGY
good
program.
life. Then came the
BGY.
BGE.
1 year ago.
We discussed this. So
Yes,
tell us
BGY.
what BGY is.
B is called
B
blue collar.
is the hacking of information, use of
Use
information,
information.
stealing technology.
Steal technology.
Yeah.
Technology transfer and theft.
It is-
IP theft is B. We estimate it's 200 to 300 billion a year if you read.
Yeah.
If you read the report from the Defense Department or the White House, it's 200, 300 billion a year.
Yes.
So that's B.
Here is the B.
G is go to the bank. Money is power. China can buy America. If a hedge fund needs money, they just say how much. 1 billion, hundreds of billions.
Why?
Why? Is sex.
Sex.
You can have all the girls you want.
So you go to
If
China,
you
how
go
will
to
not?
China,
You have
and
video,
I
you go to
hope
China.
you will not,
Any hotel,
in every hotel and social area they have video cameras. They keep everything in case one day they have to threaten you.
Every inside, outside.
You say, and I've become aware through the administration, that there have been several letters, handwritten, by either Wang Qishan or Xi or someone very high up in the CCP, where they've taken an American citizen, whether it be, you've said Steve Wynn, or Sheldon Adelson, or Lloyd Blankfein, or Steve Schwartzman, any of these people that are Western capitalists looking to do business in China, and they have delivered these letters to the U.S. administration. Is that true?
Definitely.
And these letters are looking for your extradition. Shouldn't those people, if they're carrying letters from one government to another, shouldn't they have to register as a foreign agent? Are they breaking, would they be breaking U.S. law?
Definitely.
Maybe the FBI should look into this, yeah? Is there political, what I've noticed lately in the last few months is I've actually noticed some media outlets saying that Xi's political power, given the position he's taken in the tariff battle and the fact that the economy is headed down, is his political power waning? Is it in question at all? Is there anyone challenging Xi in China?
I can't talk about cheap. I believe in 2 years China will be broke or in a revolution.
I'll tell you a story. The President Bush, 43, his last state dinner with Hu Jintao, he actually got to speak with him alone. So President Bush asked Hu Jintao, he said, what worries you the most? And President Bush says, I'll start. He says, what worries me the most is a potential for another terrorist attack on the United States soil.
I know.
And you know what Hu Jintao said? He said, jobs. I need to create at least 20 million jobs per year, or there'll be a revolution and I'll be out of power. So what you're saying is if the economy turns lower, that there might be a revolution and the CCP becomes restructured.
All the leaders are trained not to tell the truth.
They teach you how to lie. And tell me, why do you think Fan Bingbing was disappeared and just recently reappeared? Why do you think she was taken by the CCP?
They want her to shut up. Don't talk.
And why? Why? You basically said that she is Wang Qishan's girlfriend?
Yeah, definitely. See, many people girlfriend.
And then she took offense to that and sued you in New York.
Yes.
How much money had she laundered?
Oh my God.
Billions of dollars. And she charged 20%. Another guy had to pay 35%.
That's better than acting.
Oh, I really want to do the business.
You make 200 million at a time. That's pretty good. That seems so outlandish that it's hard to believe that's true. For you to say that someone just gets to keep 20% of $4 billion running through 2 banks in China. But you're saying that's how it works. And these things are going on every single day in the Chinese bank. And I've studied their banking system for a long time. And these claims are hard for me to imagine that they're true. They're very difficult for me to believe. One would think that a rules-based global financial system, especially interconnected in the banks, that this would be found very quickly. But what you're saying is, since the CCP runs the banks, they can do whatever they want. All right, we're going to conclude this interview with one prediction.
Yeah.
And we talked, when you and I first spent many hours together, we talked about Jack Ma.
Yeah.
And the signing of his shareholder ownership or his shares, the signing happened 2 days ago. So unfortunately, this interview didn't happen 3 days ago. But you told me, you made two pretty bold predictions about Jack Ma. Why do you think he retired from Alibaba? And is Alibaba run by the CPC? And what do you think is likely to happen to Jack Ma in the next year or so?
Two things can happen. Either jail or been killed. All the shares go to the leading families.
So he's either going to jail or he's going to be killed. That is a prediction that our audience is going to also have a very hard time with. One thing that I wanted to make sure we cover today is something that's topical and newsworthy in literally this morning is the head of Interpol, Meng Hongwei, has gone missing. And the official statement from Interpol says that they've named someone else to be the head of Interpol in the interim, and that they're going to make sure that the relevant authorities handle Meng Hongwei's disappearance. Why do you think Meng Hongwei is missing in China?
He is either in jail or killed.
You said that a year ago in YouTube.
Yeah, yes, I said.
You said he goes to jail or he gets killed. But
Yeah.
there was a third thing that could have happened to him.
Yeah.
What if he brought you back to China?
Yeah, yes.
Then he'd be good. So you're
Yes.
saying that the head of Interpol might have had something to do with the death of the chairman of HNA.
They lost all the security videos.
You're saying that all the surveillance is gone. You sent a team of your security personnel to Provence.
Yeah, Provence.
To try to find the video, and there are no video. Interpol has gotten rid of the video.
Sorry, sir.
These are so hard to believe. From my perspective, that these things happen in broad daylight, and no one in the press understands this narrative. Well, I hope you're wrong. I hope you're wrong about Meng Hongwei. I hope you're wrong about Jack Ma. I hope you're wrong about these things. You've been so right in the past that I wouldn't bet against you. So thank you again.